Could you survive as a medieval archer? Imagine this. You're standing in a muddy field. It's cold. Rain trickles down your neck. The year? 1346. You're 25 years old. In your hands, a 6-foot longbow. On your back, a dozen arrows. Ahead of you, the enemy. Hundreds of them. Armored knights on horseback, drums beating, the ground shaking. You take a deep breath. You've trained for this since you were 7. But training doesn't prepare you for the sound of death galloping toward you. You might think of medieval times as romantic. Castles, knights, honor, and shiny armor. But if you were an archer, none of that applied. You were poor, you were expendable, and your weapon? It was brutal. It required strength, skill, and a pain tolerance most people today couldn't handle. Being a medieval archer wasn't about glory. It was about survival, and pain, and pressure. One mistake, just one, and you're dead. Or worse, your friends are dead, and you live with it. Because if you miss your shot, that knight charging at you isn't stopping. People talk about warriors. But archers? Archers were something else. They were tools of war, trained, pushed, and often broken. And yet, they changed history. The question is, could you have done it? Could you have lived through the training, the battles, the endless rain, the back-breaking tension of the bowstring? Could you have watched men fall, heard them scream, and still raised your bow again? Today, you'll find out. Because the story of a medieval archer isn't just about arrows flying through the air. It's about grit, pain, endurance, sacrifice. It's about ordinary men doing the extraordinary because they had no choice. So, tighten your boots, string your bow, and get ready. This isn't a fairy tale. This is medieval war, and you're the archer. Who were the archers, really? Forget what movies have told you. Archers weren't just background characters firing arrows from a safe distance. They were essential. They didn't just support the army. Sometimes they were the army's last hope. There were different types: light archers, who moved quickly and harassed the enemy, and heavy archers, trained to stand their ground and rain death in volleys. Some were peasants, forced into service. Others, elite killers, men who could put an arrow through a man's eye from 200 yards away. Their hands were calloused, their shoulders warped, their minds focused like razors. Training started early. By law in England, boys as young as 7 were required to practice archery. Every week, without fail. It wasn't a hobby. It was national defense. Imagine a childhood of endless repetition. Draw the bow, release, again, again, again. No video games, no soccer, just splinters, bruises, and sore fingers. And the bow wasn't some toy. The English longbow, the weapon of legend, was a monster, 6 feet tall, made of yew. The draw weight? Up to 180 pounds. That's like pulling a full-grown man upward, with one arm, over and over. Most modern adults couldn't even bend one. Try holding a loaded longbow, steady in the rain, while someone's charging at you with a sword. These weren't your average soldiers. They had to become something else, something tougher, meaner, and more focused than the average man. And the toll it took? Huge. Historical skeletons of archers show twisted spines, overdeveloped right arms, compressed shoulders. Training literally reshaped their bones. Some historians say their bodies were weaponized. So next time you see a scene with an archer in a movie, standing tall, calmly firing arrows like it's nothing, remember, that guy would have started training as a kid. Broken fingers, torn backs. And most of us today, we wouldn't have lasted a week. Still think you could handle their bow? The pain was constant. Let's talk about pain, not the dramatic kind from movies, but the slow, grinding, every single day kind. The English longbow was no joke. To pull it, you needed to generate 150 to 200 pounds of force. That's like lifting a full-grown man with one arm, not once, but hundreds of times a day. Over time, this didn't just hurt. It changed their bodies. Modern scientists have studied the skeletons of medieval archers, especially those found on the Mary Rose, a sunken warship from 1545. What they discovered was shocking. The bones in their shoulders and upper backs were deformed. Their right arms were massively overdeveloped compared to their left. Spines were twisted, ribs compressed. It's like their skeletons adapted to the demands of the bow, or broke trying. Think about that. Training was so intense it left permanent damage. And that's just the bones. Now imagine the skin, split knuckles, torn fingertips, open blisters. They didn't have gloves, no padding, just raw flesh and wood. Then throw in infections. There were no antibiotics. A splinter could kill you, but you couldn't complain. There were no sick days, no sympathy. You trained, you shot, you fought, and you did it all while hurting. Imagine drawing a 6-foot bow, arms shaking, back burning, rain in your eyes, and knowing that if you drop it, someone else dies. This wasn't an Olympic sport. It was war, brutal, grinding, physical war. And archers weren't just participants, they were engines of it. And here's the wildest part. They were effective. Despite the pain, despite the injuries, these men could shoot 10 to 12 arrows per minute. That's 1 arrow every 5 seconds, accurately, while standing in mud under fire. So the next time you're sore from the gym, ask yourself, could you do that in armor while bleeding, with your life on the line? First blood, what battle really felt like. You're standing on a hill. Your boots are soaked. Mud grips your ankles. The smell of sweat, damp leather, and fear is thick in the air. You can hear them, the enemy, hundreds of feet, marching in rhythm, drums, horns, shouting, metal clashing. But the worst sound is silence, the moment before the arrows fly. Your commander raises a hand. You draw your bow, 100 pounds of force pulling against your back, shoulders screaming. You can barely see them yet, but they're coming. Armored knights, shields, banners waving in the wind. If they reach you, you're dead. But you're not alone. Dozens of archers at your side. One line, one shot. You release. And then, chaos. Hundreds of arrows arc into the sky. The sound? A ripping whoosh like tearing the air itself. Then a heartbeat of silence before screams begin. Men fall, horses rear, shields splinter. But you don't get to watch. You're already knocking the next arrow. You don't stop. Shoot. Breathe. Shoot. Because if you miss, your friends die. This isn't clean. It's not fair. Arrows don't always kill instantly. Sometimes they pierce a throat. Sometimes they bounce off a helmet and hit someone behind you. Yes, that happened. And sometimes the danger comes from behind. See, in the chaos of battle, discipline breaks. Panicked soldiers rush forward or fall back too fast. And guess who's behind them? You. If the line in front of you retreats suddenly, your own arrows can land in their backs. Or worse, they blame you for the losses. There were times when angry footmen turned on their own archers, called them cowards, or cursed them for shooting too early or too late. So yes, you feared the enemy, but you also feared your own army, because in the madness of medieval battle, anyone could be your executioner. And yet you stood your ground. With arrows flying, steel clashing, men screaming, you aimed and fired again. That was the life of a medieval archer. No glory, just fear, focus, and survival. Archers weren't just strong, they were smart. Let's get one thing straight. A medieval archer wasn't just a guy with a bow, he was a living calculator. Every shot wasn't just instinct, it was math, speed of wind, distance to target, elevation, formation density, and all of it had to be solved in seconds, under pressure, under fire, with lives on the line. Imagine this. You're aiming uphill. The enemy is 200 yards away. A gust of wind hits from the left. You've got 5 seconds to adjust. If you aim too low, your arrows bounce off armor. Too high, they miss entirely. You don't get a second chance. This wasn't some wild spray of arrows. Good archers could read a battlefield like a map. They knew how to predict troop movement, find weak spots in formations, and even bait enemies into traps. Some battles were won by a single volley of well-timed arrows, but only if the archers stayed calm, focused, and in control of the chaos around them. You had to be cold-blooded. While everyone else was screaming and dying, you had to think. Battlefield archery wasn't strength alone. It was chess with arrows. Except here, when you make a mistake, someone dies for it. And here's something you might not expect. Archers didn't love knights, not just the enemy knights, even their own. Why? Because knights got the glory, the songs, the respect. Archers got mud, pain, and blame when things went wrong. Knights often looked down on archers, saw them as lesser, as peasants with sticks. But guess who actually won battles? At Crécy, Poitiers, Agincourt, it wasn't the knights who turned the tide. It was the longbowmen standing behind wooden stakes, tearing through cavalry like paper. Archers knew their worth. They didn't need armor to feel powerful. They had skill, precision, and intelligence. And maybe that's why some archers despised the lords they fought beside. Because they saw the truth. Behind every glorious charge, there was a line of muddy, exhausted men with bows, who'd already done the real work. Off the battlefield, the hard life of an archer. You survived the battle. Your hands are raw. Your shoulders throb. Maybe your leg's bleeding, but you're still alive. Now what? You go back to camp, if you can call it that. It's not a rest. It's not relief. It's more suffering. No warm bed, no thanks. Just a damp canvas tent full of tired, coughing men, muddy boots, rotten food, the stink of wet wool, unwashed bodies, and smoke. There's no glory here, just blisters, lice, and the distant groans of the wounded. And even in peace, there's no break. You train, every single day. Draw the bow, release, again and again and again, even with muscles screaming, even if you're sick, even if it rains. If you fall behind, you're useless in battle, and useless men don't last long. Some days you're told to shoot at straw. Other days it's live animals. Sometimes it's prisoners. You're not a hero. You're a weapon. And weapons don't rest. They stay sharp. Meals? If you're lucky, a crust of bread, old cheese, maybe some dried peas. Meat was rare. Clean water was even rarer. Many archers had constant diarrhea, infections, coughs they couldn't shake. And pay? Good luck. Archer units were supposed to be paid, but often kings ran out of coin, so you fought and bled for months without seeing a single silver penny. You did it because you had no choice. Most archers were poor, peasants. If they quit, they starved. If they disobeyed, they were whipped. If they ran, they were hanged. Still, many dreamed of escape. Some tried. Deserted at night. Vanished into the woods. Risked their lives for the chance to not be a weapon anymore. To find a quiet farm. A normal life. A life where no one screamed when you woke up. Because the truth is, the real battle wasn't always fought with arrows. Sometimes it was just getting through another day. The war inside. Mental pressure of a medieval archer. You shot, you hit, he fell. You don't know his name, you don't see his face, but you know what happened. Your arrow ended someone's life. Maybe not the first, probably not the last. And still, you draw the next arrow, because if you stop, you die. Or worse, your friend does. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and the man beside you is bleeding out, calling for his mother in the dirt. This is the part no one tells you about war. The part after the battle. The silence. The shaking hands. The way your brain replays the moment over and over. The sound of the arrow hitting bone. The look in a dying man's eyes. The feeling of being both safe and guilty. You learn to shut it off. Or you try. You laugh too hard at jokes around the fire. You drink whatever you can find. You don't sleep much, because when you do, they come back. The ones you killed. The ones you couldn't save. And yet, every morning you get up, you grab your bow, you train, you march, you kill again. Some men crack. They start trembling before battle. Their hands won't hold the string. They flinch at loud noises. Stare into space. Go quiet. Weird. What happens to them? Not sympathy, not care. They're labeled cowards. Some were beaten back into formation. Some were tied to stakes and whipped in front of the others. And some just disappeared. Deserters, cowards, traitors. That's what they called you if your mind broke before your body did. There was no word for PTSD, no understanding of trauma. You were either strong or dead. The worst part? Some archers became numb. So numb they stopped caring who they hit. Enemy, ally, innocent, didn't matter. Because that's what war did. It didn't just break bodies. It broke souls. And still, tomorrow, you pick up the bow again. Archers, the hidden heroes of history. When you hear about famous medieval battles, who do you think of? Knights in shining armor? Brave lords on horseback? Kings leading charges? But what about the archers? At battles like Agincourt, Crécy, and Poitiers, it wasn't just swords and horses that won the day. It was the arrows, thousands of them, flying faster than the eye could follow, raining down on enemy ranks like deadly hail. Sometimes, just a few hundred archers could change the fate of an entire kingdom. They tore through heavily armored knights and shattered cavalry charges, all without the protection of armor or the power of horses. Just their bows, their skill, their deadly precision. The English longbowmen rewrote the rules of warfare. They forced armies to rethink strategies and kings to respect the power of a well-aimed arrow. Without them, many great victories would have never happened. They were the backbone of medieval armies, the silent, deadly force behind glory and conquest. Yet here's the strange part. Despite their crucial role, archers are almost forgotten in history. Songs and stories praise the knights, their valor, their chivalry, their shining armor. But archers? They're barely a footnote. Why? Maybe because they were commoners. Peasants, farmers, men who wore no armor and rode no horses. They didn't get the glory, the banners, or the ballads. They were the invisible force, deadly but unseen. Or maybe it's because their work was brutal, dirty, and painful. Hardly the romantic image people want to remember. But here's the truth. Without the archers, history might look very different. Next time you hear about medieval battles, remember this. The men with bows, standing in the mud, suffering in silence, were the real game changers. Could you be a medieval archer? Let's be honest. Could you hold a bow that pulls with 150 pounds of force? Could you live day after day in mud, cold, and pain, with your life hanging on every arrow? This isn't a game. This was survival. Every shot mattered. Every mistake was deadly. You needed more than muscles. You needed nerves of steel, patience, focus, brains, the ability to stay calm while chaos screamed around you. Archery was as much a mental battle as a physical one. You had to fight exhaustion, fear, and pain, and still pull back that string with perfect aim. It wasn't just about strength, it was about willpower. Most of us couldn't handle it. Most would crumble after a day. But medieval archers? They were tested from childhood. Starting at 7 years old, they trained, day in, day out. Sometimes the test was brutal. Who could pull the heaviest bow? Who could shoot the smallest target at the greatest distance? If you failed, you didn't get a second chance. So ask yourself, are you ready for that kind of challenge? Could you become one of the best marksmen in the world? Or would you break before the first arrow flies? Stick around, because next I'll tell you how these archers were tested, trained, and turned into living weapons. You won't believe the lengths they went to. Final bow: respect, reflection, and realness. Now you know. Being a medieval archer wasn't a fairy tale. It was brutal, painful, a daily battle for survival. No shining armor, no fanfare, just raw willpower and relentless grit. These men faced hardships most of us can't even imagine. The crushing weight of their bows was nothing compared to the weight they carried inside, the fear, the exhaustion, the constant pressure to perform or die. Respect for archers is respect for human will, for the ability to keep going when everything inside screams to stop, for standing your ground even when the world is falling apart. You didn't just listen to a story, you walked the path with them, even if just for a moment. History isn't about swords and kings. It's about people. People who endured, fought, and survived when others couldn't. So next time you think of the Middle Ages, don't just picture knights charging or castles towering. Remember the silent archers, those who pulled their bows in rain, mud, and blood. They changed history. They shaped the world. And now you carry a piece of their story with you, a story of strength, sacrifice, and relentless courage. What will you do with that?